I'm sitting on a sagging bed in my childhood room, struggling to believe how badly everything collapsed. 6 months ago, I was posting engagement photos, savoring the flattering comments, and mapping out my dream wedding. Now I'm a magnet for hateful messages, gossiped about in my hometown, and haunted by one painful question. Why did I ever let myself get this deep? My name is Helena, and I used to be engaged to Mark. Everyone who saw us from the outside assumed we were the ideal couple. He had a secure job in finance, I worked at a small boutique, and we seemed content. But under the surface, I felt like my existence was overshadowed by Mark's endless workloads. He was always glued to spreadsheets, phone calls, or conversations about quarterly returns. At first, I was impressed by his ambition. Then it started to feel like I was invisible. My complaints about feeling neglected were typically met with an apologetic shrug. He'd promise more quality time soon, but each week ended exactly the same way. I wanted romance, spontaneity, and maybe some lavish gestures. I'd see social media posts of other couples who seemed to have that excitement, and I'd feel a jolt of envy. Still, I told myself to be patient. We were engaged. Once we were married, surely we'd find a healthier balance. I clung to that hope, not realizing how easily I could get pulled into someone else's orbit. My downfall truly began when I met Mark's grandfather, George Crawford. George was not Mark's blood relative in this story. He had married into the family much later, yet took on the role of a grandfather figure. He was a wealthy older man with cultivated charm. He wasn't feeble despite his age. On the contrary, he radiated a kind of confidence I'd never seen before. Mark's relatives hinted that George was demanding, known for overshadowing others. I didn't care. When I first encountered him at a family dinner, he gave me that sense of attention I yearned for. He complimented my hair, my style, my manner of speaking. Mark was too busy checking emails to notice how much George was flirting. Looking back, it was silly to feel flattered just because an older man with money took an interest in me. But at the time, I was starved for recognition. Even Mark's parents, who were also there, barely acknowledged me. George asked about my goals, my thoughts on the upcoming wedding, and teased me gently about the stress of planning everything. I remember laughing in relief that somebody cared about my day-to-day drama. The next week, I was surprised to receive a message from George. He had gotten my number from some family contact list. It was harmless at first, a friendly inquiry into how I was coping with wedding stress. One message became a string of them, and each time he'd slip in compliments that made me glow. He said I had unrealized potential, that I deserved better than a fiancé who was too distracted to even notice my struggles. I kept telling myself it was innocent, he was only being nice. But a tiny spark inside me enjoyed the attention more than it should have. Our messages turned into occasional lunches, which felt oddly exhilarating. He'd pick places Mark never took me. I still told myself it was friendly. Then, at one of those friendly lunches, George slid a small gift box across the table, insisting I open it. Inside was a slim, shimmering bracelet. I gasped, urging him to take it back, but he said it was no big deal. "Just a token," he told me. I wore it for a moment, heart pounding, imagining Mark's face if he saw it. My conscience flared, but George's insistence calmed me. "Don't mention this to Mark," he said lightly. "He's too busy for such details anyway." Right there, a boundary was shattered. Several days later, I was wrapping up a stressful shift at the boutique when George texted me, "Dinner? I have a surprise." Mark was stuck at work again, so I agreed. I convinced myself it was better than sitting home alone, waiting for my fiancé to respond to my messages. That evening, George took me to a restaurant that had white tablecloths, dim lighting, and an air of exclusivity. The staff greeted him with respectful nods. My heart raced with excitement. Nobody had ever treated me that way. Then, halfway through dinner, he reached for my hand, gave a mild sigh, and told me I was mesmerizing. My cheeks burned. Yet I felt a twisted sense of relief. I wasn't invisible here. By the end of that dinner, we shared a long conversation that cut through every bit of caution I had. He confided his dissatisfaction with Mark's limited imagination. He joked that Mark was a loser for letting me slip away on these dinners unchallenged. I found myself half laughing, half cringing. But I didn't stop him. My silence basically endorsed his view. Later, in the car, he leaned over, cupped my face, and I let him kiss me. My mind screamed this was wrong, but my craving for attention shouted louder. Mark was the one ignoring me, right? This was his fault as much as mine, I rationalized. From that point on, George and I developed a strange routine of stolen meetups. He often showered me with gifts, jewelry, fancy perfume, an expensive handbag that I hid under my bed. Every time I considered refusing, he brushed it off as trivial. "I have more than I need," he'd say. "Let me spoil someone who appreciates it." He also ridiculed Mark regularly, calling him a dull fiancé, joking that I deserved a real man. Even though part of me felt uneasy, I let myself laugh along. I still had no intention of calling off the wedding. In fact, I kept telling myself, it's just a fling. Once I'm actually married, I'll settle down. No more messing around. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I was arrogant. I believed I could control the situation, that nobody would find out, and that Mark's inattentiveness gave me the right to a last adventure. It got riskier. We'd sometimes meet at hotels where he'd discreetly book a suite or say it was for business. I'd slip away after work, making up excuses about meeting friends. Each time I felt a guilty thrill. Then, during one of those encounters, I noticed George rummaging in his bag for some pills. He mumbled something about needing a little boost, looking annoyed at his own age. That moment was awkward. I stood by the bed, half-dressed, uncertain whether to stay. He insisted we just wait a few minutes. I remember thinking, this is so weird. But I stayed anyway, longing for that sense of validation he gave me. Afterwards, I felt unsettled, yet also frustrated. It wasn't exactly the smooth, passionate scenario I daydreamed about. It felt forced at times, and I quietly complained in my head that George's tool, as he himself called it, didn't always cooperate. It created this strange comedic air when I had to wait around for his pills to kick in. I'd think, is this what I risk my relationship for? But he would smooth it over with lavish praise, expensive dinners, and the notion that Mark took me for granted. More than once I told myself that each rendezvous would be the last. Then I'd see George's name flash on my phone and I'd let him sway me. My justification was always the same. Mark neglected me, so he essentially pushed me into someone else's arms. If he truly cared, wouldn't he notice my new designer handbag or unusual schedule? Ironically, Mark started acting more attentive a few weeks before the wedding. Maybe he sensed something was off. He asked if I wanted him to spend a whole Saturday visiting floral shops. But I found him insincere. I was already used to George's brand of attention, gifts, and compliments. Mark felt like an afterthought. I kept telling him it was too late to start caring. All along, I had no clue that Mark had discovered everything. The night my life fell apart, Mark claimed he had some urgent work trip. He left early in the morning, telling me he'd see me in 2 days. I didn't find it suspicious. Once alone, I thought I'd just watch cheesy shows and text George. Around dinner time, I came home from running errands to discover the apartment in disarray. Certain items were missing. Mark's gaming console, a few personal boxes, and I saw a cluster of objects on the kitchen table, an envelope, a flash drive, a printed photo, and a small bottle of those helper pills George used. My heart started pounding. Why would Mark leave these items here? I picked up the photo first. It showed me in a dimly lit parking lot, leaning against George's car, arms wrapped around him. The angle suggested a sneaky photographer capturing us from a distance. Cold panic settled in. I snatched the envelope next. Inside was a single note. "Check the flash drive, then go online and see how I've introduced you to the world. Hope the pills amuse you. Bye." Trembling, I raced to my laptop and plugged in the flash drive. A folder appeared. There were multiple videos, each with different timestamps. I clicked on one, and a shaky clip started playing. It was me at some deserted parking area, leaning into the passenger side of George's shiny car, obviously doing something intimate. The visuals were fuzzy, but definitely damning. I gasped, slamming the laptop shut. My mind reeled. Mark must have hired someone to follow me, or he did it himself. I felt sick. Against my better judgment, I launched my web browser and visited the link Mark mentioned. It was a post on a gossip subreddit with a harsh title referencing me by my personal nickname. The text read something like, "My fiancé hooking up with an older family member, caught on camera." A short clip was embedded, featuring part of the footage I'd just seen. Hundreds of comments piled up, mocking me, calling me names, speculating about my motives. Some even recognized the pill bottle in the corner of one screenshot, making jokes about how old my secret partner must be. I was mortified. Within an hour, my phone blew up with notifications. Mark's sister, his cousins, random strangers from online, all hurling insults or accusations. The slurs were vicious. People calling me desperate, a gold digger, an embarrassment. I tried to call Mark, but his phone was disconnected. I texted George, got nothing back. It dawned on me that I was left to face this alone. My fiancé had effectively ghosted me while broadcasting my worst moments. The next day, I found out from the wedding venue that Mark had canceled our reservation. The florist demanded a hefty cancellation fee. The photographer messaged me to confirm that there'd be no event. I was on the hook for some of these bills because Mark had emptied our joint account, leaving me with the obligations. I tried to explain, but the vendors didn't care about my sob story. Bills had to be paid. Family members from Mark's side bombarded me with messages calling me a traitor. They labeled me perverted, filthy, and worse. Mark's aunt left a voicemail telling me never to set foot near their family again. I didn't know what to say in response. I was still half in shock, half outraged. I felt a twisted sense of victimhood, insisting to myself that Mark should have confronted me privately. He never gave me a chance to apologize or talk. Instead, he humiliated me publicly, which I considered a far bigger sin. I might have cheated, I told myself, but he annihilated my reputation and posted personal footage online. That's beyond cruel. I tried to contact George for help, or at least comfort. The phone rang endlessly. Then I discovered he'd apparently left town. Perhaps he was hiding from the fallout, refusing to face the meltdown. At first, I was livid at his desertion. He had fueled this entire affair with lavish gifts, invitations to high-end hotels, sweet nothings, and now that it all came crashing down, he vanished. I realized I had been used, or at least made into a convenient fling. My illusions about him caring deeply for me were crushed by his silence. When I gave up on salvaging anything at the apartment, I drove to my parents' house, tears streaking my face. I told them there had been a breakup, that Mark canceled the wedding. I tried to hide the grim details, but news travels fast in a small town. My mother discovered the scandal through a neighbor who apparently saw the Reddit post. From then on, she refused to meet my eyes. My father exploded in fury, demanding how I could betray my fiancé with a man decades older. They kept repeating that I brought shame upon our family. I wanted to scream that Mark was the one punishing me so harshly, but any protest felt hollow. Meanwhile, the hateful messages continued. Some scolded me for hooking up with someone old enough to be my grandparent. Others made cheap jokes about the pill bottle. One person wrote, "If you crave money, I guess you can swallow your pride." My social media was flooded with mocking memes. The entire fiasco turned me into a pariah overnight. Unable to cope, I quit my job at the boutique. The manager said staff morale was suffering because of the rumor mill swirling around me. My phone was constantly lighting up with calls and texts from unknown numbers. I changed it, but the gossip found me anyway. Mark's relatives wanted me to return the engagement ring if I still had it. The ring was worthless to me now, but it had vanished along with Mark's other possessions. He must have taken it before leaving. In the midst of all that chaos, I kept replaying the times I waited with George for his pill to start working. I recalled how awkward it felt. Standing in a fancy hotel room, hearing him mumble about getting older, me glancing around at the expensive furnishings, tapping my foot as if waiting for a late bus. More than once, I wanted to laugh or cry at the absurdity of it. Now, that memory fueled my anger. All that for a humiliating fiasco? I vented to an old friend who basically told me I'd made my bed and needed to lie in it. She wasn't sympathetic about my shame or how Mark exposed me. I tried to regain some control by requesting moderators remove the Reddit post. Some didn't respond. Others claimed it didn't violate their rules. Even if they removed it, clones of the post were popping up on other forums. The damage was done. Internet re-uploads were unstoppable, and the scandal had its own twisted life cycle. When I attempted to rationalize my predicament, blaming Mark for ignoring me or George for seducing me, my parents shut me down. My father told me point blank that I was an adult who knew right from wrong. My mother tearfully said, "You should have called off the wedding if you were so unhappy." But I never intended to lose the wedding. I just craved excitement on the side. Seeing everything unravel taught me that hush-hush affairs rarely stay hidden. Without a job, with a soiled reputation, and facing leftover wedding bills, I sank into despair. My parents demanded to know how I'd repay them for the money they offered to rescue me from the vendor fees. I could only shrug through tears. Most nights I was too restless to sleep. I was haunted by the memory of that final day in our apartment, confronted by the flash drive, the picture, and those pills lined up as if Mark wanted to taunt me with every humiliating detail. He's a villain, I kept thinking. He turned me into an internet punchline. Of course, a small, persistent voice reminded me that I gave Mark the ammunition by betraying him. But in my mind, it didn't justify the public spectacle or the countless vile messages. If he wanted to break off the engagement, fine. Why drag me through the mud, plastering me all over the internet? That remains my bitter question. I considered finding a lawyer to sue him for defamation or invasion of privacy, but I didn't have the resources, and the footage was shot in a public place. Legally, it was murky. My father suggested dropping the idea to avoid more publicity. A month passed, and the wedding date arrived with no celebration. I spent it holed up in my bedroom, occasionally seeing social media posts from confused acquaintances who had no idea what really happened. Some posted supportive comments, but they were overshadowed by the avalanche of negativity. Even close friends told me they needed to take a step back, too afraid of guilt by association. I realized just how thoroughly Mark had vanished. People said he left his job, possibly transferred or took an extended sabbatical. Some guessed he was staying with a college buddy in another city. I wanted answers, some kind of closure. Instead, I got silence. The same applied to George. He melted into the ether, likely in one of his fancy properties. No texts, no calls, no apology for drawing me into this. I felt betrayed by them both. Mark for humiliating me publicly, and George for enticing me into a relationship he clearly had no intention of handling with responsibility. My daily life deteriorated. My parents insisted I look for new work, but local shops and offices either recognized me or wanted nothing to do with the scandal magnet. I tried traveling to nearby towns, though it was still difficult. The internet never forgets, so who knew if a future boss would connect me with that humiliating post? I looked into therapy. A local counselor agreed to see me, but my insurance situation was shaky, and my father complained about the cost. Still, those sessions offered a lifeline. The counselor told me that while anger at Mark might be warranted, I also had to accept my role. It was tough to hear. I wanted to pin everything on Mark's digital vendetta and George's cunning. Yet the counselor reminded me that if I'd said no from the start, none of this would have occurred. I left each session drained, torn between self-blame and outrage at how little empathy anyone showed for my side. I also had nightmares about the humiliation of that posted video. I'd dream I was in a crowd, and suddenly the clip would start playing on giant screens, with everyone pointing and laughing. I woke up in a sweat more times than I can count, heart hammering, guilt and anger tangling in my chest. In those half-awake moments, I'd sense how deeply I missed the normalcy of my old life, back when I was a fiancée scrolling through wedding boards, imagining a bright future. But that future is gone. In its place is a tarnished reputation, a family that barely tolerates me, and a yawning uncertainty about where I can ever rebuild. I never got to speak to Mark again. He gave me no chance to apologize, defend myself, or even argue. He simply exposed me to the internet's worst judgment, left cryptic items on a table, and disappeared. Did he feel triumphant, justified? My mind conjures the image of him reading comments, seeing me ripped to shreds. He must have known how devastating that would be. During a low moment, I tried calling old friends from high school, hoping one might have a spare room I could rent. A couple of them didn't even respond, probably uncomfortable with the situation. Another friend politely declined, explaining she didn't want drama. She wouldn't say it outright, but I sensed she feared my presence would invite scandal in her neighborhood. That hurt more than anything. I was left with no solid place to go except my parents' house, where each day feels like a gauntlet of judgment. I still replay the night George fumbled for his pill, cursing his age, while I stood there awkwardly. At the time, I felt equal parts pity and annoyance. He was the one who kept claiming Mark was worthless, that I needed someone mature. Then he needed chemical help to function in that domain. The irony stings. If I'd had more self-respect, I'd have walked out and never looked back. Instead, I endured those bizarre moments for the fleeting thrill of being appreciated. Now that weird memory loops in my mind, often accompanied by a wave of self-disgust. Sometimes I find the gifts George gave me, tucked away in a box. Pieces of jewelry I never wore in public, still shining under the lamplight, mocking me with their emptiness. Should I sell them? Give them away? They feel too tainted to keep, yet I'm not sure I have the heart to toss them. My mother, seeing that box, once demanded I return everything. "It's blood money," she spat. But I told her it was none of her business. That ended in an argument, my father siding with her, me slamming the bedroom door. I know they see me as the disgraceful child who got seduced by wealth. A big part of me still screams that Mark pushed me into it by neglecting me. Another part acknowledges that nobody forced me. My justifications crumble when I face them directly. The wedding fiasco eventually drifted from public view, replaced by new scandals. But the damage to my personal life remains. My parents' sympathy is thin. Mark's entire family despises me. Friends walk on eggshells around me, uncertain whether to console me or scold me. Without an income, I rely on my parents, who resent having to support a daughter who brought shame upon them. It's a miserable existence. I wonder if Mark and George ever talk about what happened. Do they blame each other? Did Mark confront George and vow to cut him out of his life? Or is George spinning stories to salvage his own reputation? Possibly claiming I was the aggressor. I'll likely never know. All I have are half-formed theories. My therapy sessions help me see that I can't remain in this state forever. I'll need to find new ways to regain stability. That might mean relocating to a place where nobody knows me, erasing my online presence as best I can, and starting fresh. The thought of job interviews terrifies me, though. What if they find the video? That worry gnaws at me. People can be cruel, and I'm not strong enough to shrug it off yet. During one therapy appointment, the counselor asked me to write a letter addressed to Mark, expressing everything I wished I could tell him. I wrote pages of frustration, sadness, and blame. I accused him of sabotage, of turning me into a public pariah. I asked him why he never tried to fix our relationship. I ended by saying I hoped he understood the lasting damage he caused. Then I read it aloud in the session, shaking with tears by the end. It was the closest thing I had to closure, though it felt hollow. Each day I endure the consequences, some from my own actions, some from Mark's extreme retaliation. Even trivial errands like grocery shopping or a bank visit make me paranoid. I think I see people whispering about me, or maybe it's just my imagination. The digital trail Mark unleashed is permanent. A single search could reveal the ugly post, fueling more gossip. I find myself stuck in a cycle of anger and regret. At moments I realize I initiated the downfall by cheating. Then the anger flares up again because Mark's revenge was vicious, no matter my wrongdoing. He could have walked away quietly, told me off in person, or ended things with minimal public drama. Instead, he enacted a spectacle. Every message from his family remains etched in my mind, full of hateful words. No matter how sorry I might be, they'll never see me as anything but the woman who betrayed their son figure with a well-off older man. Some days I wish I could speak face-to-face with Mark, just once, even if it was a screaming match. Anything would be better than this silent vacuum. I yearn to hear him say it to my face, why he posted the footage, how he managed to film it, and whether he regrets subjecting me to incessant online ridicule. Yet no call arrives, no text, no email. The fiancé I used to see every day is a ghost. George remains equally elusive. I have a fantasy in which he suddenly contacts me, apologizing profusely and acknowledging his part. He might say he was drawn to me for valid emotional reasons, or that he regrets leaving me to bear this scandal. But I know that's unlikely. Wealthy men like him typically avoid messy fallout. He's probably in a different city, continuing life as if I never existed. Sometimes I pull out the wedding invitation we had printed, reading the scripted words about celebrating a lifelong commitment. It feels surreal now. That entire plan was a mirage. I was so busy enjoying the excitement of an affair that I never realized the magnitude of my decisions. And Mark was evidently busy planning his exit strategy. The invitation belongs to a parallel universe where we might have learned how to communicate. Instead, I'm left with nightmares and regrets. At this point, I'm resigned to leaving my hometown. Rumors and scorn trail me too closely here. My parents have made it clear they don't want me staying indefinitely. I've begun searching for job opportunities in distant areas, though the question of references looms. The manager at the boutique told me to sort out personal issues first. That's hardly an endorsement. But I'm determined to do something. My father says I'd better be gone within a couple months because this living arrangement helps nobody. My mother won't even hug me goodbye. She's as wounded by the shame as I am. I'm sure to outsiders I sound self-pitying. Some might say I had it coming. Yet I still hold to the idea that two men manipulated me, Mark by ignoring me until he found a chance to publicly crucify me, and George by exploiting my vulnerability with wealth and flattery. That doesn't excuse me, but it's how I rationalize my situation. I cling to that version of events to keep from drowning in a sea of guilt. I don't want to see myself purely as the villain. Is there a lesson here? Possibly. Don't cheat. Don't rely on sneaky thrills to fill emotional voids. Don't trust an older man who pretends to be a benefactor, because there's always a hidden price. Don't underestimate a partner's capacity for revenge. I'm sure that's what people mean when they say my story serves as a cautionary tale. Too bad that knowledge came too late for me. As I finish recounting this saga, I'm staring at the empty ring box Mark left behind, the lid ajar, a silent testimony to how quickly everything unraveled. Any illusions of a perfect marriage are gone. Any illusions that an affair can remain secret are gone. My future is murky, but I know I can't stay stagnant here rereading nasty comments. So I'll muster the last bit of strength I have, pack a suitcase, and search for a chance to begin anew. Yes, I still blame Mark for how brutally he handled the situation, and I blame George for tempting me, mocking Mark, and then fleeing. But I also know I have to salvage my own life now, with no one swooping in to rescue me. Maybe that's the ultimate penalty for my arrogance. Maybe I'll emerge stronger, or maybe I'll keep struggling for years. For now, I close my eyes and envision the day I'm far away from here, in a town where nobody points at me, where I can walk down the street without feeling like a walking scandal. If I ever see Mark again, I don't know whether I'll lash out or break down in tears. If I ever see George again, I'd probably glare at him, outraged by how easily he dropped me. But I doubt I'll get those moments. The people who shaped this wreckage are gone, and the only person left to face the consequences is me. That's the bitter reality behind my last name turning into an internet punchline. If there's a glimmer of hope, it's that I can rebuild a life on new terms, free of illusions and shallow validation. I just wish it didn't have to come at such a steep, humiliating cost.